Galaxy Fighter. This lesson is called Submission to AppStore. When you start to look at the submit process, you will be overwhelmed by the concepts you have to distinguish, like developer certificate, distribution certificate, developer provisioning profile, distribution provisioning profile, UDID, App ID, iOS provisioning portal, code sign, and so on and so on. You will be rather confused, and you might think that this is all a mess. Let's try to make some sense of the mess. Let's begin with what you might want to do. You might want to test your app on your device. You might want to let beta testers test your app. You might want to submit your app to the App Store. Or you might want to create an app for an in-house use of your company. Whatever of these things you want to do, you must first enroll as an Apple developer and pay a minimum of $99. In this lesson, we will focus on how to submit your app to the App Store. Once you understand that, it will be easier to understand the other ones. Here is a summary of the process. From the Apple's point of view, you have two roles, a developer role and a seller role. Here are the different files you will need to get from Apple in order to be identified as a developer and as a seller. The first thing you have to get is an intermediary certification. Its purpose is to identify Apple as an intermediary between you and the customer. You must have this file first before you can generate the other ones. On the developer side, you then need to get a developer certificate and the developer provisioning profile. On the seller side, you need to get a distribution certificate and a distribution provisioning profile. You will also need to get an App ID for your app. What do you do with these files? The three certificates will be used by the keychain, while the provisioning profiles and the App ID will be used by Xcode. What does Apple want? Why do they bother with certificates and provisioning profiles? They want to make sure that you are who you say you are, and that is done using the certificates and the provisioning profiles. They also want to make sure that your app meets their quality criteria. They will do it through a reviewing process, as you will see later. Here is a diagram from Apple's website. First, you will have to enroll as an Apple developer, and then you have to distribute your application. The distribution is done in a number of steps. First, you have to generate the certificates. Then you have to generate the provisioning profiles. Then you have to code sign your app. Then you have to upload it to Apple for review. And then the app has to go through a review process before it hits the App Store. To enroll as an Apple developer can be as fast as 1 hour, but can take much longer, especially if you're not an individual, but a company. The reviewing will take typically 1 week, and when your app starts to sell, you will get 70% while Apple keeps 30% for themselves. You should be aware of that the process will be frustrating, just to warn you so you know what to expect. The steps that you see here in Apple's diagram are not single steps, but just an umbrella of several steps that you will have to perform. Here is the process in more detail. The process is divided into 4 groups: certification, provisioning, code signing, and approval. And for each group there are steps that you have to go through. In this process you will use two websites. One is called iOS Provisioning Portal, which you will use to get certificates and provisioning profiles. And the other one is called iTunes Connect, which you will use to upload your app for the reviewing. The tools that you will be using are Safari or another web browser to interact with those two websites. You will use keychain access to store certificates in your computer. You will use Xcode and iTunes for provisioning, signing, and the approval process. Let's begin with the certification group. In order for Apple to certify you, they need to establish a secure two-way communication with you. And there is a standard way of doing that, called public key cryptography. The one that Apple uses is RSA. RSA is an algorithm for public key cryptography. It is based on the difficulty of factoring large integers. A user publishes the product of two large prime numbers as their public key. The prime factors are kept secret. Anyone can use the public key to encrypt a message, but only someone who knows the prime factors can decode it. What you will use on your side is a program called Keychain Access. Keychain is Apple's password management system, and many applications store their passwords in the keychain automatically. For example, web browsers, FTP clients, email clients, and so on. And examples of information that keychain can contain is passwords, private keys, certificates, etc. And in our case, these two are the important ones: private keys and certificates. Here is the certification process. When Apple wants to send encrypted information to you, they have a public key and you have the corresponding private key. So any information they send to you, you will be the only one able to read it. And the other way around. When you want to send encrypted information to Apple, the keychain access will encrypt it using the public key, for which Apple has a private key. So between your computer and Apple's computer, there will be a ping-pong of encrypted messages sent around. On your side, you will use the Keychain Access program, and on Apple's side, they will provide a website called iOS Provisioning Portal. You will enter information on that site, and that will be encrypted and sent to Apple, who will decrypt it and store the information in their database. So, to get your certificates, you will have to ping-pong information between the keychain and the iOS Provisioning Portal. Let's now take a look at the whole process. The first step is to enroll as an Apple developer. The next step is to get the 3 needed certificates. First, an intermediary certificate, then a developer certificate, and lastly, the distribution certificate. The next step is to get App ID and 2 provisioning profiles, one as a developer and the other one as distributor. The next step is to code sign your app, prepare for uploading by archiving it, and then upload it to Apple. The last step is to get it approved by Apple. This process will take about 1 week. The process involves 2 websites, both owned by Apple: iOS Provisioning Portal and iTunes Connect. iOS Provisioning Portal is used for certificates and provisioning profiles, and iTunes Connect is used for uploading and the review process. 4 tools are involved on your computer: a web browser, Keychain Access, Xcode, and iTunes. The whole process is complex and will take about 200 steps. Does the process have to be that complicated? No, Apple has not made it as simple as it could be, but until they change it, we will have to live with it. Let's look at the process a little more in detail. The first step is to enroll as an Apple developer, which will cost you minimum $99 per year. Here is the process. As you can see, it involves 5 steps. To enroll, you have to go to iOS Dev Center, Google for it to find it, and enter 3 pieces of information that you will use later. Apple ID. Most probably you'll enter your email address here. Password. Choose something that you will remember. Company organization. If you don't have a company, you can, for instance, use your own name here. You will also have to enter a lot of other personal information that you don't have any use of, but Apple does. The second step is to get the certificates. To get the intermediary certificate, you will have to use your Apple ID and your password. Having the intermediary certificate, you will use it together with your email to get certificate signing request, from which you will generate the developer certificate. This certificate will have a public key and a private key. It is the private key that is important here, since it is the private key that identifies you as a developer. So you should make a copy of it and keep it somewhere safe. Now you are done with the developer side, and you'll have to do the same thing on the distributor side. You will use the intermediary certificate together with your email and company name to get the certificate signing request, from which you will generate the distributor certificate. This certificate will also have a public key and a private key. Here also, it is the private key that is important, since it is the private key that identifies you as a distributor. So you should make a copy of it and keep it somewhere safe. Now you are done also with the distributor side. The third step is to use the bundle identifier from Xcode to generate the app ID. Having the app ID, we can generate the provisioning profiles for the developer side and also for the distribution side. The fourth step is to use the distribution certificate and the distribution provisioning profile to code sign the app. Having code signing it, we can archive it. But before we can submit it, we have to validate it. And to do that, we have to prepare for uploading using the iTunes Connect. So the state goes into waiting for upload. Now we can validate and submit, and the state will change to upload received. Now the app has to go through a revision process at Apple, which will take about 1 week. If it is not rejected, it will eventually be ready for sale. I also want to say a few words about the preparation for uploading. There are some things you need to think through and prepare before you upload your app. The version number, the primary category and the subcategories, the large 512 by 512 app icon, the app name, make sure that it is not already taken, description of your game, the keywords, which will help the customer find your app, support email address, and the address for the supporting website. Also a number of screenshots that will help the customer see what your app is all about. When you got through the whole process, you might think that it is nice to get it over with and that you will not have to do it again in the future. But unfortunately, that is not so, because your app can get rejected, certificates expire, code gets moved to other computers. Hope you have saved the private certificate keys. New iOS devices appear, new versions of Xcode come, so do the new versions of iOS, and so on, which means that you will have to do this or a similar process again in the future. Before I end this lesson, I want to point out some other resources. There is a nice video at this address at YouTube. It does not cover the whole process, mostly provisioning and code sign, but it's worth to look at. There's a course at lynda.com called Distributing iOS Application through the App Store. There is a document called Your First App Store Submission.pdf that Apple provides. You can Google for it. There is another technical note, TN2250 from Apple, that gives overview and details. That's all for this lesson. Good luck when publishing your app.